China has been doing something strange for a while, against logic and against everything in the world, deliberately devaluing its own currency, the Chinese yuan. At the time of recording, the rate was about 10 cents, roughly 20 US dollars. If we look closely, we find a very low number. China is considered the factory of the world and the second largest economy on the planet Earth. Naturally, a strong economic country like this should have a currency that is high and stable against the dollar, right? Especially if we look at the country ranked 6th, for example, not second like China, which is the United Kingdom. We find that the British pound is worth $1.30, and France ranked 7th, has the euro at $1.10, meaning higher than the dollar itself. So, how can a country the size of China have massive cash reserves and produce for the whole world, while its currency remains this cheap? To understand this puzzle, we need to go back to the 1990s and the beginning of the new millennium. China built its giant empire based on one basic principle, known in economic circles as the China price, a term that terrified all factories in Europe and America because it expressed the ability of Chinese factories to produce anything and everything at a much lower cost than anywhere else in the world, from the smallest needle to cars, electricity, and heavy factory equipment. The secret behind the attractive price of Chinese products was not just cheap labor or even government subsidies for factories. The biggest secret was in the policy of the Chinese central bank and how it managed the yuan's value. The Chinese government understood well that any cheap currency means more sales outside its borders. When the yuan is cheap, foreign importers can buy larger quantities of Chinese goods with the same dollars they have. Imagine you are trading in America and want to import a shipment of clothes from a factory in China. That factory pays its workers and electricity and raw material bills in Chinese yuan, so naturally it prices in yuan. But you, as an American trader, have all your money in dollars. Here comes the role of the exchange rate, which determines how many dollars you pay to buy items originally sold in yuan. If we assume $1 equals 5 yuan and the shipment costs 50,000 yuan, you pay $10,000. Now, if the Chinese government decides to devalue the currency and makes $1 equal 10 yuan, then your shipment will cost only $5,000. The direct result is that Chinese goods become much cheaper for the foreign buyer, and of course, this encouraged traders to increase their orders, import larger quantities, and rely fully on China. At the same time, all competitors from other countries trying to sell the same goods but at higher prices were hit. That is why from 1995 to 2005, China did something unprecedented. At that time, it was understood that China pegged its currency almost entirely to the US dollar and fixed the rate at a very low number, 8.28 yuan per dollar. And this peg lasted for a full 10 years without change. During those 10 years, the Chinese economy was skyrocketing, so in any normal economy, the currency in this case would increase in value along with the economy. But that was not the case. What happened was the exact opposite. China refused to let the yuan appreciate and kept the price low to ensure its dominance in exports. This policy made Chinese products frustratingly cheap for competitors. Western markets were flooded with Chinese goods. And large global companies at the time found that the only solution to compete with China was to close their factories in their own countries and move their factories entirely to China. Indeed, foreign investments agreed on China as the country. Billions and factories began to boom in every Chinese city, absorbing millions of workers. This shift created an unprecedented economic boom in China. At the same time, other countries paid the price. Millions of jobs in the industrial sector in European countries disappeared completely because they couldn't compete. For example, in America, about 2.4 million manufacturing jobs vanished from the map between 2001 and 2008 because factories had already moved to China. But the issue doesn't stop with Europeans and Americans. When China, the world's largest factory and exporter, decided to manipulate its currency and devalue it, the effect caused a backlash wave hitting the entire global economy, and the Asian countries neighboring China were always the first victims of this policy. Countries like South Korea, Taiwan, Japan, Singapore, and India, whose economies also heavily depend on exports, compete with Chinese products in European and American markets. So when the yuan devalues, Chinese goods dominate the market completely, causing factories in other Asian countries to lose millions in orders and force layoffs. Therefore, the natural and necessary response of these countries is to devalue their own currencies to save their economies. The central banks of Korea, Taiwan, and other countries find themselves compelled to intervene in the market to weaken their local currencies against the dollar, keeping their prices competitive, even though they are not directly involved in the trade conflict between America and China. Here, a question arises. How does the Chinese central bank keep playing this game without international countries and institutions taking any action? In the past, China used to devalue its currency directly and blatantly. But in recent years, they have started handling the matter professionally. Every morning, the central bank there sets a reference rate, and the yuan is allowed to move only within a 2% range above or below that rate. This is called a managed float economically, meaning the currency is apparently left to supply and demand, but at the same time, a ceiling is set. If they feel the currency should rise, they make the reference rate weaker than market expectations, so it always remains stable. But it doesn't stop there. China has the largest foreign currency reserves in the world. The Chinese central bank says their foreign currency reserves are about $3.2 trillion, which is the official announced figure, though many see it as not real, and the actual number is much higher. International financial institutions estimate China's reserves to be between $4 and $5 trillion. And this huge amount of stored dollars allows China to control its currency's exchange rate. If they want to devalue the currency, they gather some dollars from the market, so the demand for. When the dollar rises, the yuan's value falls. If they want to do the opposite, they inject some dollars into the market, so demand decreases and the yuan rises. But to keep the central bank out of the scene, they let the big state banks handle this on their behalf. They enter the market to buy and sell dollars, and that way, it stays legitimate. Of course, this doesn't sit well with the Americans. Members of Congress keep proposing bills demanding sanctions on China until China adjusts its currency rate to a fair price. With the arrival of the Orange Man to the White House, we saw fierce attacks on China in his speeches. He considered China the direct cause of America losing thousands of factories and millions of jobs as soon as he took office. He imposed very high tariffs on Chinese goods, which we discussed in an earlier episode. Of course, America's goal with these high tariffs and duties was to force China to change its trade policy and import goods from America. But China responded by using its strongest strategic weapon. They devalued the yuan again normally and used this exchange rate as a shield to absorb the shock of the tariffs. The idea is simple. If America, for example, imposed a 25% tariff on Chinese products, China would lower the yuan by 10% or 15% below its real value. So if they made some price reductions at the factory, they might cancel the entire tariff impact on the end consumer. A clear example of this is what happened in the automotive sector in 2005 when the European Union imposed a 17% tariff on electric cars coming from China. In response, China devalued the yuan against the euro by 8.2%. Subsequent reports showed that the yuan's depreciation added a profit of 1,600 euros for each car sold in Europe. allowing the company to absorb the tariff cost and maintain its competitive price without raising the price for the European consumer. In the end, this strategy made so is China's policy of currency devaluation harmful to China itself.
فالصين تكسب اكتر، وعلشان كده الاوروبيين والامريكان هيتجننوا منهم. وهنا في سؤال تاني بيطرح نفسه، هل سياسة الصين في تخفيض العملة دي في منها اضرار على الصين نفسها؟
Surely, it's not all positives. Of course, there's no smoke without fire. When the Chinese currency is weak, it means buying foreign goods becomes more expensive. China is indeed the largest exporter in the world without dispute. But it is also one of the largest importers of raw materials globally, the materials used to run factories, including primarily oil, metals, and agricultural crops. Because of this, China faces a huge increase in procurement costs since the yuan is cheap. So China has to pay much more to buy the same barrel of oil or ton of iron that it used to buy at a lower price. Moreover, the weak currency reduces the purchasing power of the Chinese citizen, whether for local or foreign products. The central bank's monetary policy benefits China as a whole, the giant factories and exporters, but it harms the Chinese consumer himself. This has become the most dangerous side effect of the monetary strategy, the ongoing threat of capital flight from China. Many Chinese companies, especially in the automotive and software sectors, have reported profit declines despite increased sales in 2024 and 2025. Foreign direct investment, FDI, has fallen dramatically. Official figures show that actual foreign investment usage dropped by 27.1%, the steepest decline since the 2008 crisis that shook the entire world. Additionally, 2024 balance of payments data revealed that net foreign investments leaving China amounted to $168 billion, the largest capital outflow since data recording began in 1990. In short, this is due to what China is doing and the currency always depreciating. So, if you earned 1,000 yuan today, and earn 2,000 yuan the next month, you feel like you haven't really, it's not progressing, and foreign companies have started gathering their belongings and leaving China. The issue is not limited to foreigners only. Local Chinese companies are also drowning in external dollar debts. The lower the yuan's value, the larger these dollar debts become, by a lot. And in the end, China has two completely opposing dreams. The first dream is that it needs a weak currency to remain the world's factory. And the second dream is to build a global reserve currency that one day can challenge the dominance of the dollar. But how can they achieve both of these at the same time? How will they build a globally trusted currency based on a currency that is manipulated and devalued frequently to support exports? So, will China really be able to achieve both dreams and surprise the world with a new way that changes the rules of the game? Or what? Especially since we are now living in a pivotal period witnessing the collapse of the dollar and the rise of the Eastern Bloc. So that's it. Who has made it this far? Everyone who has made it, please give us a like, subscribe, and graduate so we know how many have reached the end. And don't forget, if you have any episode suggestions, write them in the comments. Goodbye.